Hey everybody, welcome back to Meta Perspective, and today we have a very awesome guest. His name is Frank Yang. He has a YouTube channel that's really big. He's got a crazy Instagram, and if you're familiar with awakening and consciousness, you may have come across his work. He's otherwise known as the Infinite Bra. So welcome on, Frank.
Sometimes I go by Eternal Bra.
Eternal Bra. Okay, so
Depends.
Eternal. So
or the absolute normie.
Absolutely. So for people listening and watching this, right? What is the Infinite Bra?
Infinite Bra is just a men are made up. Basically, you know how like in a fitness community they call each other bras.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, is this, you know, this like, hey, is this bra? It's like, hey, bra, you wear bra? Yeah. So I came from that community or that industry. It's like industry now. I'm not really officially in it right now because like I don't really make fitness content anymore, but I spent about like 5 years like in the midst of the fitness like community. Actually, when I first started making YouTube videos, I was doing like fitness already. And I think I was one of the only people that was uploading fitness videos onto YouTube. That was before the whole thing got like big, you know, not my channel, but the whole fitness thing. And I think I made a video, my most viewed video is me eating 10,000 calories or 8,000 calories in a day to show people that that's how I bulk. And then that was one of the first videos online that was like, you know, documenting people doing that, but now it's everywhere. So yeah, anyway, but now I'm doing that with like the awakening spirituality community. Documenting the journey and recording your own like awakening experiences and breakthroughs in real time. So hopefully in the future, more people will start doing that. You know, I bring my GoPro to the retreat and I just capture like during my Kundalini awakening, I captured it. Doing what I call the Big Bang, I captured it. Like you probably do the same if you have like, imagine if you see a UFO, you just kind of capture it like in real time. That's kind of like what I'm doing with like fitness and like what I call contemplative fitness. Anyway, so long story short, the bra thing came from the fitness thing, and the infinite thing. Well, I mean, I just started to say infinite a lot once I realized infinity as our natural state. Because you know, consciousness, awareness, what do you want to call it? It's as a matter of direct experience, it's infinite, right? So I just kind of merged these two together and just sounds kind of catchy. I don't know. I think I don't know if maybe I didn't even make it up. Maybe someone else called me that. A lot of like my like nicknames online, even since like high school, people made it up for me. And I just kind of went with it. I don't know, but it's all the same. Right?
Well, I really appreciate you taking your time coming on, man. You're a really cool dude. But you know, I actually don't know your whole journey. I think I've heard parts of it, but what you know, here on this talk we're going to be talking about, you know, everything from meditation, awakening, consciousness, and wherever it goes from there. So you know, what got you started on your spiritual or awakening journey?
Fitness, man. Just lifting weight. Like when I was a kid, I just wanted to be like really fast because my favorite animal was the cheetah. So I just wanted to be fast for no reason other than just wanted to be fast. I was obsessed with like speed and explosiveness. And I realized, oh, wait a second. If I wanted to be faster, I need to lift weights, not just like run around like the track. So I started to lift weights because I was studying all the sprinters. So I had like a lot of muscles. And then I started to get big and strong. That's how I started with the fitness journey. And then I realized that, wait a second, if I wanted to be like the complete package, I need to work on my brain. So I started to read philosophy. And I started to get into like psychology and the mind, especially like, you know, consciousness. You know, so I started with the body and then the brain and then the mind, eventually consciousness. And I was like reading a lot of like phenomenology, philosophies, like, you know, Husserl and Sartre and Heidegger and like Wittgenstein, people like that. And I was like, wait a second, something's missing here. If I want to study consciousness, I can't just read about it. Just like lifting weights, you can't just be reading about bodybuilding magazines and like, you know, the science of strength training. You have to lift the weights. So I started to be like, okay, so what do I need to do to experience, like, I guess the first person subjective experience of these outer state of consciousness? So I started to do it in, I started to experiment with psychedelics for like a couple of years. I wasn't doing it like every day. I wasn't like, you know, a psycho now or anything. I probably had like, you know, 5 trips in a year or something like that, like LSD trip, mushroom trips.
Yeah.
And then one day, my friend was like, "Okay, you've been doing all this like LSD. Let's try some DMT." So he gave me and then DMT. So like
Yeah.
like aliens. I saw a lot of entities and beings that were like the hybrid of machines and animals and like Buddhas, Eastern like beings. That was one of the things that popped in my head was like, wait, all these beings they remind me like the feelings of it and the looks of it reminds me of like Eastern philosophy, Eastern thoughts more so than the Western stuff that I was reading. Or the aliens were more like Eastern. Maybe that's just my projection. I don't know. But ever
Yeah.
since that trip, I started to get into like Eastern stuff more. Meditation. I started reading. I think one of the first books that I read was Sam Harris's Waking Up. Also,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Power of Now was the Power of Now and Sam Harris Waking Up were the two meditation and spirituality books that sort of got me kind of hooked on like, okay, now that I did psychedelics, how do I lock this in as my direct moment-to-moment experience instead of just like a peak experience of like, psychedelic high. So that's when I started getting into meditation, and I started to meditate. I started out with like TM, and I did like basic mindfulness through like Sam Harris's instruction on YouTube. There was like one video online where Sam Harris just gave like a 30-minute guided meditation. Now he has a whole app, but before it was just like a 30-minute Sam Harris guided meditation. It was a little different than like TM was mindfulness, a little bit different than TM. But after that, I was just like, okay, this is something else to explore. So I started to get into like mindfulness and Vipassana like insights. And then I went to a retreat. My first retreat was when I crossed the arising and passing away phase, which if people don't understand or don't have knowledge about the maps of insight, which you do, so I'm going to talk to you as if you know it. The arising and passing away is basically like the one event in your spiritual journey where you experience something so profound that you can't go back. Like you're on the path, but it's still like pre-stream entry. It's still like first level of awakening. But my first retreat was when I accessed states of consciousness so crazy. I was like, you can do this with mind, like without any psychedelics, just naturally. That's insane. There's really something to meditation. So after that retreat, I started practicing. Before I was practicing like maybe like half an hour a day. And after the retreat, after the rising and passing away event, I was practicing like 2 or 3 hours a day after the retreat. Yeah. And then 2 years later, I was doing that for like the next 2 years. That was in 2016. For the next 2 years, I was practicing like 2 or 3 hours a day. And then I went to my second retreat in 2019.
These are.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to, just for the sake of people listening to this conversation, you went to the Goenka retreats?
Yes, the body scanning, Goenka.
Okay. Yeah, so the Goenka Vipassana meditation retreats.
Yes.
And what was that like for you?
Dude, it was just mind-blowing. Every single day, I just had so many different insights, and all the stuff that I was doing before, all the stuff that I read, were just like congealing like crazy. Every day, I was just having a lot of mind-blowing experiences, altered state of consciousness, a lot of insights into the nature of consciousness, insight into like myself as a character. So definitely, I think that was probably the most important event in my life, like going to that first retreat. Yeah, one of the first. I'll say the 3 events that are the most like crazy in my life. One is that retreat, first retreat. One is the second retreat where I hit stream entry, and the third one was what I call my final awakening, where I dropped every single speck of solidity within my body, mind, and everything flipped over. Hasn't been a sense, and that's when I started to refer to myself as Infinite Bra.
Infinite Bra. Yeah, so we're gonna circle back around.
Okay.
We're going to end up circling back around to that because I do want to talk more about that. But again, just for people listening, what is stream entry?
Stream entry is a technical term from the Theravada tradition. It's basically when you hit your first cessation or fruition. Cessation is basically the quote unquote highest attainment in meditation. It comes after the 8th jhana. If I may use the analogy of a video game, it's almost like, when you meditate, you go through these different levels of consciousness, different levels of the mind. What's happening is that you're actually just peeling away instead of like gaining. One way to look at it is like, oh yeah, you're gaining. But I think a more accurate description is the whole process of going from like the first jhana to the 8th jhana, going from like the lowest level of consciousness for meditation to the highest. It's more like just peeling away the layers and layers and layers of your conditionings and your traumas and what I call the solidity within your body mind. Or I guess you could say it's kind of like Michelangelo chipping away the marble, right? And instead of to reveal the aesthetic void underneath.
And in some yoga traditions, they consider on their path of enlightenment, what you're doing is you're removing the obstacles because it's already there.
It's already
you're removing the obstructions in the way that that are helping you realize it directly.
Right, just peeling the layers off of the self. Put it really terms, So
the body. That's the Goenka uses. They use the body scan, right?
Yes.
So just in like 2 minutes, can you or less? What can you explain how that works for people? Like, how does the Goenka body scan technique work?
Body scanning, basically, you're trying to be mindful, trying to bring attention to every single square root inch of your entire body, from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. So you try not to miss a single part. So you go around your head, your shoulders, your chest, and your stomach, and your butt, your legs, your arms, right? You try to pick up every microscopic sensations that's going on within your body. And the thing is, though, your body is already just vibrating with sensations all the time anyways. You don't have a body from a meta direct experience. What you have is just a cloud, a field of energy, a cloud of sensations. But before you started to like get really good at body scanning, or before you peeled off the layers, you experience the body as solidified, right? So during this process, you kind of transform like alchemy from solidity to like something like liquid, to like clouds of sensations like smoke, and then finally to air, like emptiness. But emptiness is also form, so you kind of go back full circle. And then you're talking about revealing what's already the case. Emptiness is our, I guess you can call it, true nature. So through the body scanning technique, it's actually, I think body scanning is actually one of the most effective techniques out there, because all your solidities and your traumas and all your subconscious stuff is stored in the body, even though it's like it's in the mind as well. But the body mind is the same structure, right? The brain, and everything, the body, it's all one structure. So by peeling away the body, you also at the same time peeling away the mind, and vice versa, right?
Well, and for people watching and listening to this, if you go on Frank's channel, he did a really awesome like half-hour video on the body scan just like in the last few weeks. I thought that video was excellent.
Thank you.
I thought you did a really good job explaining how you do it and how it works, and so I really appreciate that. I mean, if you type in Frank Yang on YouTube, you're gonna find it. But is that the name of your channel?
Yeah. You just can type in Frank Yang and then
it's gonna come right up. So have you ever tried the like the Mahasi style, or been to like a Mahasi retreat, or just?
I've never been to a Mahasi retreat, but after the second retreat, just naturally I started progressing into scanning other sense doors, because the body is only one sense door. I mean, you could potentially take this meditation path all the way to stream entry or beyond just by doing body scanning. But at least on my path, up to a certain point, I realized, wait a second, the body is just one sense door from the relative level. You can also vipassanalyze or be mindful of, or scan, or pay attention to, or deconstruct or dissolve other sense doors, because solidity is not just in the body. I mean, like, I say it was in the body, most of it is in the body, but like, even like perception, like lenses of perception, what I call it, like the sense that there's a hearer in the head, that there's a seer inside, like behind your eyes, there's a thinker in the middle of your brain. That's also stuff that you can dissolve. That's also solidities due to conditionings that were congealed somewhere in your body mind that you could kind of take a look at. Be like, wait a second, is there really a seer in here? Or is that just like my imagination, or the process of conditionings? Solidities, taking credit for like infinity, that's just already aware of itself, like reality, that's just aware of itself. So all that process is really the same, right? You're going through the body, but then you go into different sense doors and realize, different sense doors, the fact that it's a seer, a hearer, a thinker, a doer, that's just more solidity, more quote unquote physical solidity, right? So it's just an extension of body scanning, you could say. Instead of just focusing on my body, I was focused on other like aggregates. And I actually found Daniel Ingram after my second retreat. And that's when I started to do the Mahasi noting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And
I have to remind your audience that again, they're the same thing. Because usually people get like really like I don't want to say confused, but like they have like different camps of it. Like, okay, here's the body scanning and it works better. And then here's Mahasi noting. It's different. Blah, 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 blah. But like I said earlier, it's all the same. It's just about dissolving solidity. That's it.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
once you
no.
dissolve about solidity, it's this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's infinite. Yeah, because I see, yeah, I always, that always seems to be like either Goenka or Mahasi,
Yeah. Yeah. Or like in
and
mindfulness or like TM, yeah, yoga. All practices lead to the same place.
yeah. Well, that's one thing I really appreciate about we mentioned Daniel Ingram, because he's like he incorporates a lot of it. He, like what he says, perennialism, you know,
Hmm.
a lot of these, you could have those insight stages without having
Any meditation.
technically,
Right.
having formally practiced Theravada Buddhist,
Don't have
Buddhist meditation, or the insight stages can kind of roll on, through your regular life or through other
yes.
meditations, right? You know,
Yes. Like one of my clients that I talked to yesterday, he said he had a cessation by doing self-inquiry. And you said yourself earlier that you had some kind of cessation event through a near-death experience. And if you think
yeah,
about what a cessation is, it's basically unconsciousness. It's basically the loss of consciousness. Like the video game character, after going through all the levels, eventually he's ejaculated out of the screen altogether, and his entire reality, entire universe gets rebooted, and then he goes back into the game again, right?
yeah,
So that's a
because
near-death experience. And then
yeah,
going to sleep, a dreamless sleep, is the same as cessation. The difference is like the insight that you get, the way that your mind is rewired when you train
oh
yourself. When you train yourself to go through different levels and eventually ejaculate yourself out of the screen, that does something to the brain that, say, just falling into a dreamless sleep doesn't.
yeah,
Right.
yes.
So
And there's that again. I'm referring to one of your videos here, because again, I thought it was a really awesome video. You talk about like intellectual understanding, experience, and then realization.
yes.
So you want to explain that to people, what that means?
Yes. Usually when one goes through the path of insight, they started out with intellectual understanding, just like stuff you read, right? It's like, okay, I'm reading about awakening, I'm reading about different stages of consciousness, or when I used to do before when I was into like philosophy and psychology, that's kind of like intellectual understanding. You're just kind of theorizing about stuff, mentally masturbating, thinking about awakening, thinking about enlightenment, thinking about meditation, or thinking about the mind through like philosophy. And then you have an experience of that. It's like, okay, I read about Kensho, now I have an experience of it through like meditation or maybe a psychedelic trip, whatever, right? That was my journey, right? I was, doing philosophy, and I started doing psychedelics, and I started to meditate. And then meditation will bring that experience into a realization. What I call realization is you permanently lock in the experience into a permanent shift.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And
sometimes people have an experience, a glimpse of infinity, right? But they don't have the concentration power to kind of hold it, or their mind isn't strong enough to like make that into their direct moment-to-moment experience, and they have to like train harder to hold it. But at the same time, it's not really you holding it. It's just having the concentration power to peel off more layers of the conditionings. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just I got a random question. Because you mentioned the psychedelics before. Did you ever do the 5-MeO?
Yes, I did that after I did that after my first retreat, like a couple of years after this first retreat. And yeah, the second time I did it, I had a breakthrough. Like I think the first time I had a breakthrough too, but the second time was like a real breakthrough in terms of like I really perceived form and emptiness as identical. It's almost like my experience right now. It's just like this vast infinite space where form and emptiness are totally identical, and where it's just like it's really hard to describe.
Yeah, of
Non-dual,
course. Yeah,
non-dual, non-dual awareness, boom, like that. So you
yeah,
basically get
yeah.
the non-dual awareness with like one smoke. Like what you take a
Yeah.
couple of tokes and then you get non-dual awareness.
Do
Uh,
you think 5-MeO is lives up to the hype?
I would say so. Yes, I think
Okay.
so. I think so. The first, I remember when I had a breakthrough. That was pretty. That I was like blown away. Right, I was blown away. But then I was even more blown away when I sort of lock that in as my direct experience. I mean, now I don't have any like crazy visuals, because like crazy visuals, like trippy visuals and colors, all that's just the byproduct of the dissolution of the dreaming mind, of the dissolution of conditionings. Once you dissolve everything, there's not going to be much visuals in your direct experience, but the non-dual awareness, that the context. If you look at the visuals and the trippy stuff, is like the content. What's really important is accessing the context, sort of like accessing the screen instead of like getting caught up in the experiences and the trippy visuals and what's on the screen. But at the same time, context and content are one, right? But then if the content is empty, the context also is empty. So in a really technical sense, I don't even think there's awareness right now.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, you know, people talk about like being aware of awareness, or like, oh, everything is consciousness. That to me is just like kind of like a midway stage to like a full-blown realization, because at the end you realize that the bubble of awareness, the bubble of consciousness, is also something to let go of. Because without the subject, the separate subject in the center, there isn't going to be this bubble of awareness, right? So in a sense, like talking about like shrinking the character, shrinking conditioning, peeling away the conditioning. When you peel away the conditioning, the bubble of awareness will start to expand. Like stream entry was like, I remember after my stream entry, I was like, okay, my perception is now like kind of panoramic. It's kind of like 360, but there's a bubble, and the bubble is like kind of limited. It distorts the objects in the room, so to speak. And as I go deeper and deeper down the path, that bubble will start to expand even more, When I was like on my third path, the bubble was almost infinite. It was like almost like the fifth jhana. Like my day-to-day experience was almost like the fifth jhana. I was like, you know, just like infinite bubble. But there was still something there. I was still perceiving like a substrate, like a fundamental substrate of reality. And then after the fourth path, what do you want to call it? That popped.
Yeah.
Technically, I could say this is awareness, but I wouldn't even use the term awareness to describe this right now. Like, you know, even infinity is like, even enlightenment, all those different terms, there's so much like spiritual like connotations to it. I kind of prefer the word, like I call it the full natty state, like the natural state.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about
that also came from like the bodybuilding community, because like, you know, in bodybuilding, they always like arguing over, oh, this bodybuilder natty, like, is he natural? And I use the natty state to kind of separate this from a psychedelic experience, because obviously this is natural, and also to remind people that this is your most natural state. It's not something that's like mystical. It's not something that's like, you know, trippy. It is what it is. And it's the unaltered state of consciousness, if you want to put it like that, versus the altered state of consciousness of like, you know, all the crazy experiences, mystical experiences you undergo through the process of awakening or different psychedelic trips. Even the egoic state is an altered state of consciousness.
They're conditions.
Right. It's just all just conditioning. Even like, you know, craziest mystical states, the craziest God states, they're still just the byproduct of the unfoldment or the dissolution of conditionings. After all that's dissolved, it's an unaltered state of consciousness. And by this point, I wouldn't even call it consciousness. You know what I mean? This is what it is.
And in one of your videos, you said something really cool. It's like, you know, you even you kind of have to experience that connected to everything just to be able to transcend it.
That's one of the stages. Like I go through like I have like my own, like I made my own, like, I guess, like stages of awakening. I try to make it as simple as possible for people. First stage, you have the ego, right? And the second stage, you have the awareness. You know, people talking about like, oh, you're this loving awareness, but eventually you just identify from even awareness as the bubble kind of expand even more. And now the awareness is so big, let's call it God. Let's call it like, you know, creator, infinity, everything, right? And then what comes after that is nothingness. Basically, you expand and then you contract to nothingness. And the fourth stage is the nothingness phase, the non-being, I guess you could call it the nirvana phase, emptiness. Basically all the Buddhism stuff is kind of like on the fourth level. And the third level is more like, you know, Christ consciousness kind of stuff, like all the love and all the divine stuff, the Brahmins, and like even like the Buddha mind. And then there's a fifth stage that I wouldn't even call it a stage, what I just call it the natural state, where you kind of disidentify and I guess transcend all those different stages. And then you reach the natural state where in a sense you can still access all those different stages, because at the natural state they're all the same. It's like video game. You can kind of shift back and forth between like a first person shooter or like, you know, perceiving the avatar is like in front of the screen. I don't know how do you call that.
Third person.
A
Yeah.
third person, or you can have like bird eye view, right?
Yeah.
And by the time you reach a natural state, it becomes totally irrelevant what stage you experience. It's almost like it's just happening by itself. You know, the different reconfigurations of sensations that's just happening by itself through the causes and conditions of the universe. You know, sometimes you know this, sometimes you that, but the sort of like there's a sense of like equanimity throughout all this different like, you know, shifts that happens, because like you can't just be like, I mean, it's kind of like the weather. I would say like, you know, Kenneth Folk calls enlightenment kind of like the weather, except like before it was kind of like a weather too, but before it was more like you're experiencing different emotions from day to day as a separate character. But after awakening, when you kind of you become like not the character anymore, but this thing, it's kind of like, you know, there's still like different unfoldments going on, because, you know, reality is infinite, right? Like the potentiality of this thing is infinite, right? So it's almost like you experience instead of your like day-to-day mood, it's like God's day-to-day mood. Yeah, you almost experience it like a weather.
Yeah. So yeah, no,
But
it makes
the thing is
sense, right?
that the sky, but your true, I guess you could, your true nature becomes the sky. It doesn't really matter the weather you're in, right? The sky doesn't care if it's like raining or if it's sunny or it's like cloudy. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Now, you know, you mentioned the paths, you mentioned stream entry. Could you briefly describe like what it was for you to be on like stream entry, second path, third path, and then fourth path?
Stream entry, my first sensation after that, like I said earlier, like the bubble of awareness just got unhooked from my head. Before it was like all here, right? Before it was like in the head, the awareness, right? But then after stream entry, the thing just flipped over. But when it flipped over, it's like there was still like, it was still limited, right? And then second path, I think this what got me over to the second path and third path territory was a full-blown Kundalini awakening, where all my chakras just open up from the bottom of my spine, you know, to the third eye. Very classical Kundalini awakening.
Yeah. And
But
you gain those paths just through going to retreats and like diligent practice. Is that
yes,
okay?
yes. I would say retreats are the two retreats that I went to were probably did the most damage. But I also practiced like 2 or 3 hours a day on average for like the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of practice. Yeah, so after my Kundalini, so again, the Kundalini awakening, people tend to perceive it as something this very mystical thing, right? But it's just the release of blockages in the body, right? So what are chakras? Chakras is just, you know, okay, you have blockages here and here and here and here and all the way here, right? Once you start to cleanse out your blockages and conditioning, of course it started from the bottom, right? Because like before it was like everything is solid, so like you start from the bottom, but once the blockages start to get very thin, very subtle, of course, then it's like kind of like more like in here rather than like throughout your whole body, right? That's why the chakras are kind of like in order, you know. So like once you all exploded, a large, really big part of my conditioning has been dissolved by the time I had a Kundalini explosion, full Kundalini explosion. And after that, I was officially like on like third path. And that was when I started to experience kind of like, I guess you could call it the fifth jhana of infinite space as my default state of consciousness. And then from that place, I started to meditate from that place. I started to incorporate a lot of techniques like do nothing meditation, like Dzogchen, where you just like the headless way, you just kind of like abiding in that infinite space. That's kind of like where you're meditating from. And I was still doing like body scanning, vipassana from that space. Now before was kind of like doing it through the space of like, you know, this. But then after the when I was in third path, when my walking around experience has been like really different now, I couldn't help it but just to meditate from that space and doing vipassana from the space. And then doing the vipassana from that space really gave me a new perspective in terms of like finding out and tracking the rest of the solidity. Because from like third path to fourth path, there's still solidity, definitely. That's why you're not done yet. And the last bits of solidity, it's really hard to track. You know, it's like you kind of feel like you're done because like this is fucking crazy, right? Like, you know, fifth jhana all the time in a sense. Like, but then you're not complete. You just know you're not done yet. So because there's still some sort of solidity somewhere in the body mind. So from that infinite space area, it's kind of gave me a bird eye view of how to like dissolve the rest of the solidity, which then when the last spec dropped, it was the shift was quantum. The shift from like third path to fourth path, what I call from 99% to like 100%, is quantum. Like instead of like the back stream entry, I talked about how the thing flips over. This is like the thing flips over and it flips over again. Now it's like, yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to describe. Yeah, it's really hard to describe. But when the last spec dropped and it was just like, I remember the feeling of it is just be like, this is it, because there's nowhere to go. It's almost like the symbol, or like the infinity loop symbol, like
the Ouroboros.
Yes, exactly. Like kind of like the snake just biting its own tail. What I call universe like eating itself, or like infinity like strange looping onto itself, a universe fucking itself. I have different ways to describe it. But then when you get to that point, because all the solidity gone, right? There's nothing but like this thing fucking itself, this thing being itself. Other traditions call it just knowing itself. And that was exactly what I felt like. And then once you get to the stage, there's literally nowhere to go, because you can't get any more like empty than empty, and at the same time it's completely full. there's no space at all. There's no gap, even the air in between objects right now in my perception, in my direct experience. There's absolutely no gap, right? So if there's no gap, where is there more to go, right? So that's what I call it, my big bang.
Is there something that triggered that?
Yeah, I mean, I went through a dark night like a week before that, which was just as bad as like the Kundalini dark night. I'll say the two worst dark nights that triggered the Kundalini and the triggered the Big Bang were the worst. I mean, I cycled through like dozens of dark nights, or even probably hundreds if you count the micro ones. But the two biggest dark nights were the ones that triggered the Kundalini awakening, that perpetuated me to third path, and the dark night before the Big Bang. So I guess you could say those dark nights triggered it. Other than that, after stream entry, you can kind of analyze what caused this shift and what caused this insight, but it's all happening like by itself after stream entry. That's what we call it stream.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And so for people listening, for listeners, so we can give them more context, you mentioned the dark night, and I think it's important to talk about that because some people can say they have their an AMP, they have an arising and passing, they're on this journey, and then they hit a dark night, so they're on a spiritual high, and then they come down, which is inevitably going to be happen, and sometimes they feel like now they're regressing right, but really that's not the case. So can you explain that?
I've always treated the dark night as a sign of progress ever since the beginning, because one of my friends, I think thanks to one of my friends who's kind of been through a lot of dark nights, the advice that he gave me, back then he was like, deeper into the path than I am. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's the one that got me into the first retreat. He said every time you experience a dark night, just look at it as like an upgrade in consciousness. And I was like, okay, I guess it's more like, my own analogy is, when you like lift weights, right? Your muscles have to get sore for it to grow. You have to apply pressure. You have to, if you squat 500 pounds, it's going to be painful, right? But then once you got over the hump, muscles grow. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Right.
And for people that happen to be Dragon Ball Z fans listening, we can say that the Dark Knight is kind of like the hyperbolic time chamber.
I've never seen Dragon Ball, but go ahead.
What? Oh no.
Dude, people keep telling me to watch Dragon Ball because I started to get into podcasts lately. They're like, you have to read Dragon Ball. I was like, okay.
Well, no, it's so cool, man. And the Goku's gravity training room, that it's like Goku's if you look at it metaphorically, you can say Goku's Super Saiyan transformations are like forms of awakening, metaphorically, because it's not like he has like especially if you watch the recent ones, there's a Ultra Instinct. And that's literally like that's actually more like directly correlated with awakening, because he no longer has to like think and coordinate his movements.
Oh, okay, perfect. Great analogy.
So the Ultra Instinct, it's it's automated, but not in a way like it's you got. I mean, you gotta see it,
Yeah,
dude. It's so awesome.
I get it. It's kind of like the sense of having no doorship. Like after you dissolve the center point, uh, after you dissolve the doer,
It's like, yeah, it's like the Zen no mind.
yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like it's almost like, it almost feels like the individual character can't really think a thought anymore or make a decision or even move a muscle, but every movement you make and every thought you have, it's like the doing of the universe. Like when you
Yeah,
run, it's just like the universe running, right? But you're still doing stuff. Like I'm still talking to you, but it feels like
yeah,
you're, another analogy that I use is you kind of feel like you're like a puppet, like, but you're like this air puppet made out of like nothing. But then you're connected to the infinite, but there's no strings. That's
yeah.
kind of how it feels like. Yeah.
That would make it an epic meme for people listening. Um, yeah.
Air puppet
So
with no strings attached. There we go.
yeah.
Connected to the
So
infinite.
so now, just what is your daily practice like nowadays?
Nowadays, I just do the do nothing meditation. I don't really have a kind of an official practice nowadays. I still sit every morning as part of my routine, just like I go to the gym. But after like my morning sits, like if I feel like it, I'll just do another sit. If I sometimes say after I edit some videos, I just want to chill out. If I you know read a book for a while, whatever. If I want to chill out, I'll just sit and then the meditation. It's in a sense it's hard. It's the distinction between meditation and not meditation is doesn't exist for me right now. So I mean, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, you can get more relaxed when you're just sitting still, but everyone gets more relaxed when they're sitting still as a body mind, right? But there's no more like insights in terms of meditation. There's no more outer states.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no more outer states for me when I do my meditation, and I just do I don't apply much techniques. I just kind of sit there and then that's it. So
So,
I do some breathing stuff now though, like like Wim Hof breathing. Because like before, everyone's
oh
like, "Hey,
yeah,
you try Wim Hof?" I was like, I'm not into that stuff. Now I'm into Vipassana, bro. That's more pragmatic and hardcore. But then after awakening, I feel like the Wim Hof stuff, first of all, it feels good. And second of all,
yeah,
I feel like it kind of cleans like the rest of like, your conditionings. You're still gonna
yeah,
have something like I think it takes like 7 to 10 years for you to completely clean out all your conditionings. But that's not really my goal. Like my goal, I don't wake up in the morning and be like, okay, today I'm gonna clean like more conditioning, because like even the term conditioning is just like, what the fuck is that? I don't know. But it's just like, everything that I do right now, it just if it feels right, I do it. So it just kind of feels right.
yeah,
I do some breathing practices. So that kind of like I like it. Yeah, that's it.
yeah. So, can you just explain to people what Wim Hof is?
Wim Hof is, I don't know the technical like details of the thing. I know the technique, but I don't know the, I guess if you want me to explain it scientifically, I can't. But I can tell you
No,
something very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
When Wim Hof breathing, you kind of have to hold your breath for a while, right? You breathe out, you breathe in, all the way, and then you let it go for like, I don't know, 30 rounds, and then you hold your breath. What I find really interesting is that portion of just holding your breath, because we talked about sensations earlier, right? After I do the breathing thing, and if I just sit down and relax for a bit without even trying to meditate, I can enter a session as long as like 10 minutes. I was just like completely just went unconscious, and I know I didn't fall asleep.
yeah,
It was just like a really long session for like 10 minutes. I was like, what the fuck is that? I never, my session, I had sessions. I could do it like, like very quickly, like in terms of like, going through jhanas or whatever, and going through the different doors of the three characteristics. But before I never really experienced a session where it's like as long as like minutes, right?
yeah,
And what I realized was like Wim Hof, what happens when you hold your breath is that you kind of restrict the oxygen in going into your brain. So that sort of mimics a near-death experience. What happens if you just don't breathe at all? You die, right? So what's the next best
yeah,
thing? You kind of hold your breath and kind of mimic that event horizon between consciousness and unconsciousness, right? And that fine line between consciousness and unconsciousness is really like the nuts and bolts of meditation that you talk about
yeah,
going, from like super consciousness to like unconsciousness, stuff like that, right? So breathing is really good at inducing that experience of having no oxygen in your brain, so you kind of induce this near-death experience like scenario. And DMT also, I heard, sort of like, I guess, produce that kind of chemical in your brain where your brain is flooded with some stuff that sort of mimic that kind of having just like I guess maybe it restricts us. I don't know. I don't know the scientific
I
details.
think, well, I think
But
people say like actually like if you're in a near death that you're I think it's a speculation or a theory that your body actually releases a massive dose of DMT into your body, like actual DMT from your body, because your body
right,
naturally produces it.
right, yes, yes,
So I
yes,
think some people have speculated during those experiences, your body just releases a massive dose of DMT through your body,
right. So it
you
like
know?
regardless of what happens to the body mind, the fact that breathing, the oxygen deprivation, or like meditation, a cessation, or near-death experience, all of them induces a very similar biological, physiological response to the body mind that allows you to experience the source. And what is the ultimate source that we're all going to go back to and where we came from? Unconsciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. And for people listening, Wim Hof is super interesting. And his technique, you can consider it a pranayama. He does, he teaches a breathing technique, but he's been able to demonstrate in a lab and in science actual physiological benefits in immunity and all types of other stuff. So definitely, if you're interested, I would definitely Google or YouTube Wim Hof. There's some great stuff there, and it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The practices, you can do the
Yeah, that's why
breathing
it's popular.
practices. Yeah, it over the
So
last few
simple.
years. Yeah, and it's really cool. I've tried it out, and it's pretty incredible. It's really, it makes a difference. And again, it's a pranayama. I don't know. He said he learned it kind of naturally due to the cold training. His
Mhm.
body, his that's how his body responded to the extreme cold, and he learned it after that. But what the stuff he's actually doing is very similar to the Tibetan training, the Tumo training.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I've heard of it, but I don't.
yeah, they call it the inner fire. So it's in
Okay.
the Tibetan. I don't know exactly which Tibetan training system it is or what Tibetan meditation system it is, but there's a book on it called the inner fire, and it explains several techniques, but the inner fire is the first. And there's actually a really cool like documentary from Discovery Channel, and this is what decades before Wim Hof made it popular. But in this Discovery Channel documentary, they show these Tibetan monks, and they're in like a really cold room, and they take these wet, cold towels, and for part of their training, this Tumo technique, which you do the intense breathing, and you can actually raise the temperature of your body, which is supposed to be a sympathetic nervous system thing, which you're not supposed to be able to do that, because your
Mm.
sympathetic nervous system works through your nervous system and your unconscious mind. But these people are doing it consciously through intention and during this technique. And you see them they wrap themselves with these cold towels, these freezing cold towels, and you see the steam just rising off them,
Oh, yeah,
and
I've
they
heard of that.
dry the towel with their
Oh, yeah, I've
body
heard of
heat.
that.
And so what they do for their training to get really efficient at it is they sit in there for, I don't know, like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and they have to see who can dry the most towels
Okay.
using their body heat. So it's really fascinating. But even though it's like, oh wow, there's this cool physiological effect, they use it as a beginning stage on the path of awakening, enlightenment. It's just one of their several trainings.
Yeah, it's
um
almost like it's just about cleansing your conditioning. It's like when you do the breathing, you're doing anything, you're breathing through the spine, you're releasing the energy, whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah, it's just the same thing as the body scanning. You're peeling the layers of the conditionings of the separate self just through breathing, right?
yeah,
You bring up the stuff, you breathe it out, you bring out the stuff, breathe it out, and you're kind of tampering around with this threshold between consciousness and unconsciousness. You said that they were doing stuff that most people are unconscious when that process is going on, but they're conscious during that process of unconsciousness. Yeah, so
yeah,
that's really interesting because another way that I describe the natural state is the merging of unconsciousness and consciousness. because it
Yeah.
feels like the character doesn't have any consciousness because it's externalized its own mind and consciousness to the universe. So it's a combination, a merging of super sane consciousness, or like, oh, God mind, God consciousness, and cessation, a permanent cessation where there's no consciousness at all. And if you think about it, consciousness and unconsciousness, they have to codependent rise to each other, right? So you can't really
Yeah.
experience super consciousness without experiencing no consciousness. That's why cessation is such an, for me, an important tool on the path. You know how people talk about, a lot of people talk about, oh, you can access like God consciousness without a cessation. You can just, be mindful of awareness and keep practicing exochen, do nothing meditation. But I feel like it's really difficult to lock, to lock God consciousness or the infinity like path, the infinity phase of it, without going to the nothingness also, right? The two sides of the same coin, right? Expanding all the way to infinite space is the same as contracting all the way to nothingness.
Now, for people listening, if what would you have for like advice for them on their path or journey? So say they're just getting into meditation, or they've meditated a few times before and they're interested in awakening, right? What kind of advice would you give them?
I would say consistency, and also don't make like awakening or a stage of insight your goal too much. I guess like the way I did that, I got to stream entry without even knowing much about stream entry or awakening. I mean, I did read I did watch like videos on like non-duality and stuff like that, but like back then my mindset was always, okay, I do this meditation thing. I was practicing like a couple hours a day already, but I was doing it mostly for the character. I wanted to be like, more creative, smarter, better health mentally and physically, be a better pickup artist, whatever you want to call it. That was just one of the things that I did to supplement me trying to be a better character, right? But then
Yeah.
this whole like awakening thing was always kind of like in the back of my mind. I knew about it, I read about it, but it wasn't really my goal. And I think one of the advantages to that is like I was always happy where I was in terms of like my meditation journey and practice, because I could see progress. I'm like, I'm fine right here. I'm good. You know, um, so I was never looking forward. Awakening was never really my goal. So that's why when I started talking about sensations a lot, or even just like the people in the I guess pragmatic Dharma community, when this whole meditation path is more is viewed as more like a goal-oriented approach. A lot of people don't like that. I'm neutral about it, but I talk about it. But I do get a lot of emails, people like really frustrated I'm not hitting like certain insights, certain levels, especially if they hear me talk about the cessation, whatever jhanas, that they really want to experience this. So my advice is just to kind of fuck all that. But I mean, you can read about it, but just be happy where you are right now on your journey. Because like really, the whole practice is about staying in the present moment. Like those things will happen if you just stay in the present moment. Because this thing is just the present moment as it is, right? So that's if you just kind of just focus your practice on just be quote unquote satisfied with what it is you're experiencing right now, every moment. The experiences and insights will come. If it doesn't, fuck it. Someone asked Idea Shante, oh, I don't have all those crazy experiences people talk about on the path. Am I missing out? Am I not making progress? And Idea Shante was like, no, you just have less things to let go of.
Yeah.
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 Because again, all the experiences are just things you have to let go of.
Do you think
Sometimes
now at
people
this?
get stuck too. People can get stuck in experiences, but like jhana junkies or like DMT junkies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, they get caught up on the ride too much,
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if you're chasing those experiences, actually, oh man, I posted I made like a little graphic of a Jack Cornfield quote, and it was from his book A Path with Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And the quote was something like, you know this is a very harsh paraphrase, so but this is ultimately what he was saying is like, you can have these fantastic experiences of body, mind, but those experiences in themselves do not produce wisdom.
No.
Yeah, and that gets into more of what you were saying about locking it in. You can have the
Right.
experience, but to lock it in, yeah, actually that's a great question. What kind of advice would you give to people who've had like a great experience, but they want to integrate that, they want to lock that into their baseline?
Simple answer is just more practice. Yeah, it's almost like, my analogy with glimpses, either on psychedelics or meditation, is like kind of like you put on a VR goggle and you experience, let's say, like Ronnie Coleman or Arnold, right, for like a day or a few hours, right? And then when you take off the goggle, you go back to being your squatting self. What do? You go up to the gym and lift more weights.
Yeah.
Now that you have the experience of what it's like, you kind of prime your mind in some areas at the subconscious level, what it's like to be Ronnie Coleman, like physically and visually. Now you can use that as sort of like I guess a guide or inspiration, or maybe even a reference point to your training, but you still got to lift the weights.
Yeah. And now that, with, I guess you can say your I don't want to put you on the spot, but with your attainments, right? What do you see yourself doing, like a retreat in the future ever?
No, I mean, right now, when you ask me that, my answer now is no, just because I don't feel like doing it right now. I don't really, yeah. But the thing is, like, I started to like coach meditation ever since my awakening, just because it feels right. I mean, before my awakening, I remember I've been talking about this stuff, like mental stuff, like, psychology, philosophy, and meditation for like years before my awakening. And people have always asked me to coach them. Like, I do like fitness coaching, but then some people kind of are following me for like the mindfuck stuff. Back then, I call it the mindfuck stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was more like, just me expressing creativity, with a little bit of like meditation, but it wasn't real insight because I didn't have any. Right? But it was more like me trying to figure this out and trying to sound smart and trying to like philosophize about different stuff. So people have been asking me to like coach them mentally for a while, but then I always said no. I just didn't feel right. But after awakening, I remember the first week after awakening, somebody asked me that again. I was like, Frank, man, I'm ready. Let's can you teach me how to meditate? And I was like, okay, let's do it right now. So I just hop on a call with them, Skype call, and then we did an hour and a half session. I gave him a guided meditation and just did some Q&A. And ever since then, I think that was like almost a year and a half ago. I've been doing that this whole year. Just, I don't take on everybody, but then again, it depends on what feels right. So in terms of retreat, I have no idea. Right now, I say no just because it doesn't feel right now at this moment. But I'm not closed down to if there's the opportunity, I'll do it. Right. So
yeah. So again, for people that are on the spiritual path, what kind of resources would you recommend them? Anything from like, listen, just shut up, go in a quiet place and meditate, or actual books or videos or anything. It could be any of those,
I have a book recommendation list on my website. Those are the books that really help me out. Most of those books are more pragmatic. They're more like instructional manuals, because I find that too many people on the path, like I said earlier, are mentally masturbating to like theories and reading about like non-duality instead of actually experiencing it. I would say, like, the practice is like should be like 85% of your work. And that includes daily practice and retreat. I think it's really important to go to like at least 1 or 2 retreats, just because you make more gains in like one retreat than you do like the entire like year of practicing like an hour a day, in my case anyway. So I say retreat, like practice, is really important. Honestly, now that I'm coming to the conclusion right now that you don't even need to know anything about spirituality, to be honest. That's why it's almost like, do you really need to know about how your muscles work and read about other bodybuilders or the science behind bodybuilding to make muscles, to gain muscles?
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that when I was making gains. Even like violin, I played the violin since I was like 5. Like, I took a few theory classes, but like I never paid attention to all my theory classes. I knew nothing about music theory, yet I became pretty good just by practicing. So I would say that the pitfall of like a lot of people's like gains on the spiritual path, 9 out of the 10 cases is that they're reading too much, they're thinking too much about spirituality and meditation instead of just doing a practice. They're not treating it like a physical exercise. They're not treating it like a what I call a physical transformation, right?
Yeah. So you need to actually apply.
Right.
And that was a great Bruce Lee quote. Learning is not enough. You must apply.
Yeah, simple. He put it very simply, but that's it. Yeah, and even like the shifts, right? Even like a Kundalini awakening, or like the different shifts in your on the path where you experience like a permanent lock-in of a different realization. That to me is also a very quote unquote physical transformation. It's almost like, you know how a butterfly is transformed from a caterpillar, like physically, literally, right? Right. So that's almost like the same process of awakening. Instead of like, I've told a few people that this is like kind of my new thing where I just tell people, hey man, this whole thing, it's a physical process. And they gotten glimpses just by like shifting kind of their perspective on like how to approach this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think there's people that are doing neuroscience, they're doing the MRIs that or fMRIs and
Right.
EEGs, and they're doing scans. And I know, yeah, Dan Ingram is working on that. I think Shinzen Young and other neuroscientists, a bunch of them, and they're trying to actually
The physiology.
record the data of
Mhm.
like, hey, can we actually track neurologically or
Right.
biologically or physiologically in any
Mhm.
way these awakened states. And I think that's fascinating. I love to see the science
Right.
brought to the subject. I mean, it just kind of gives it more credibility,
That too.
and gives people the kind of like, oh, there's something there, right? There's a
Right.
there
Right.
there.
Right. And also
Um,
like what I realize is in the spiritual community, a lot of people like they're sort of like what Daniel Ingram calls the mushroom culture. They're kind of like in the dark about not just their own practice, but their own attainments and their own abilities and other people's abilities, because it's all like just like he says, she says, right? But if you can really pin down the physiological or neurological changes in your experiential structure on like different jhanas and different attainments, that makes it a lot more not just accessible but less bullshit. It's almost like in
yeah,
bodybuilding, you don't sit around and talk about your physique or your training philosophy. You take it as straight and you flex your muscles, or you lift the weights. Okay, I can lift 500 pounds. I lift 500 pounds. You don't just be like talking about lifting 500 pounds by sitting at home with a VR goggle, because that's
yeah,
right now is sort of like the spiritual community is kind of like that right now. That's also because we're still in a very element, even though this thing has been around for like since the beginning of time, we're just starting to like discover the physiological and neurological like changes that correlates with those different states. So it's very interesting to see how people talk about like, oh, mass awakening. This could be like one of the most important tools for mass awakening, is to cut down the bullshit and just make it like fitness, make it like anything that you could quote unquote study. Even though like again, like on the ultimate level, this whole part, this thing transcends like materialism or spirituality. I'm
yeah,
not like, I'm a materialist. This is all about the brain. No, I don't even think like that. But just like on the relative level, I think it would
yeah,
benefit people a lot more if they kind of approach it from that angle, that slice of the dream, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for some people that's what they need.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
need this, and that's fine. So it was great having you on, Frank. I really appreciate you coming on here and spending your time with me. And
Thank
I
you.
definitely, yeah, no, I definitely want to have you on again.
Oh,
It's
whatever you want, bro.
Yeah, we'll
I love
talk.
talking to you. It was good. You're a cool guy, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, we'll either on some panels or another interview, maybe around two. Who knows? I mean, there's so much we can do. Um, but for parting advice, right? For people listening to this, um, most likely they're going to be, interested in meditation and awakening, or anything like that. So, what would be your parting advice to them?
My parting advice, just dude, I don't know. Just fucking do it, bro.
Yeah, there you go. You got to do
Just fucking do
it. Yeah, so I'm gonna end the recording here. So, but thanks so much for coming on, man. I'll speak to you soon.